story begins with the sounds of war. Endless red flags fluttered in the wind, a sea of banners belonging to a great army on the march. And through the aftermath of it all, a single figure walked across the broken ground, stepping over the shattered weapons of his defeated enemies. His power was incredible, a bright blue energy that pulsed from the sword he carried. This was the man who stood at the center of it all. His eyes were sharp, filled with the focus of someone who had never known defeat. He stood alone on the battlefield, the undisputed victor. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a legend, known across the land as the martial emperor of Ilcheon. But his victory wasn't a single event. It was a storm of countless battles. He moved like a blur, a whirlwind of steel and fury cutting through entire armies. They called him Ilcheon for a reason. It meant he was the only one. In a world full of warriors, he stood completely alone at the top, while everything around him was a mess of flying blades and desperate attacks. Yang Soo-hyuk was always the calm eye of the storm. He moved with a grace that made fighting look easy. This was the man who single-handedly unified the entire Hwan continent. His skill was so incredible. People said his martial arts had literally reached the heavens, and when the fighting was over, he was the only one left standing. He had conquered everything, defeated everyone, and left nothing but silence in his wake. This was the center of his new world, a grand palace, the symbol of his complete and total victory. He ruled from here, the unquestioned master of the entire continent. As the martial emperor, he sat on his throne with everyone kneeling before him. Beauty, gold, power, anything he could ever want was his for the taking. He had it all, but even with the world at his feet, he looked distant. There was no happiness in his eyes, no pride. It was like he was looking right through the people who worshipped him, lost in his own thoughts. So the question was simple. If he had everything a man could ever dream of, then why? Because he turned his back on all of it. He left the golden throne and the grand palace for a dark, lonely cave, chasing something else entirely. And there, in the darkness, was the man who made it all possible, the Black Sage. He looked at Soo-hyuk with a knowing smirk, unable to understand. He asked what could possibly be missing from a perfect life that would make someone abandon everything. Suddenly, Soo-hyuk jolted back. The sage's face was right there, inches from his own. He yelled out, completely startled, complaining that the man was a lunatic for shoving his shiny bald head in his face without warning. He even said it was blinding. The Black Sage was instantly offended. He demanded that Soo-hyuk apologize to every single bald man on the entire continent. But Soo-hyuk just shot back that being bald wasn't the issue. The real problem was the sage's complete lack of personal space. The whole thing quickly turned into a shouting match. The sage kept demanding an apology, while Soo-hyuk just yelled for him to get his face out of the way. Finally, Soo-hyuk gave in, sort of. He screamed that he would apologize to all the bald men on the continent, but he would never, ever apologize to him. After a moment, the fight just seemed to drain out of the sage. He looked down, defeated, and called Soo-hyuk a heartless fool. With a he asked if he was really going to torment him like this, right up until the very moment he left. Soo-hyuk just lay there, with a confident smirk, telling the sage he was only speaking the truth. The older man didn't argue back this time. He just kept his eyes down, quietly grinding some kind of red paste in a bowl. Finally, the sage stopped what he was doing and looked at him with a serious expression. He asked Soo-hyuk why he was leaving. From his point of view, Soo-hyuk had nothing left to wish for here. Only a life of comfort and enjoyment awaited him. But Soo-hyuk's gaze was distant, looking past the sage and everything around him. He explained that there was a longing inside him, a feeling so powerful that it was greater than any regret he might have about leaving this world behind. The Black Sage just let out a quiet scoff, a small, cynical smile on his face. To him, it was all just nonsense. He clearly didn't understand what Soo-hyuk was talking about at all. Even so, he continued with the preparations. He carefully draped a massive, scaly hide over Soo-hyuk's body. He explained that this was the skin of a 1,000-year-old imugi, an unbelievably rare item that only someone with Soo-hyuk's power could ever hope to obtain. The sage then took the bowl of red paste and began rubbing it onto Soo-hyuk's arm, right over the scaly hide. He continued to list off the incredible treasures in Soo-hyuk's possession, this time mentioning a mythical fruit that only appears in the mortal world once every 1,000 years. He stressed that these were things only Soo-hyuk could ever get. He looked down at the martial artist with a complicated expression. He reminded him that only he, the one called the martial emperor of Ilcheon, had the power and status to enjoy all of this luxury and power, and that's why he just couldn't wrap his head around it. He finally asked him directly, how could any feeling of longing possibly be worth more than everything he had right here. But Soo-hyuk just lay there with a confident smirk, completely brushing off the sage's point. He turned the question back on him, teasing him for being so talkative. He joked that the old man must be feeling reluctant now that he was really leaving. The sage was immediately flustered by the comment, his face twisting in annoyance as he stammered that it was nonsense. Trying to cover up his feelings, the sage insisted that he'd be dancing for joy if Soo-hyuk left. He argued that since Soo-hyuk was basically immortal anyway, his departure was a good thing. Lying on the stone slab, Soo-hyuk just calmly agreed, his tone making it clear that he knew exactly how the sage really felt. But Soo-hyuk's voice was firm. He explained that there were some things the black sage would simply never understand. The black sage stood there silently on the balcony, looking out at the endless night sky. He didn't have an answer. Soo-hyuk was thinking about the feeling he could never forget, the crushing loneliness of being completely alone in a strange world. It was a deep sadness, the feeling that he might never get to see his family ever again. The memory of their faces was all he had. The black sage looked down at him, holding a glowing blue orb. He just scoffed at the idea, saying that something like family meant nothing to him. The black sage held the glowing blue orb, his expression intense. He knew that all he had to do was place it down, and the entire process would be over. But before he did, he gave Soo-hyuk one last chance to change his mind. He asked if he truly had no regrets, reminding him that he would lose everything he had ever accomplished in this world. Soo-hyuk didn't even need to think about it. In response to the warning, a small, confident smile formed on his lips. Looking right at the black sage, he made his choice clear. He declared that he had no regrets at all. He was going to return home to Earth, and that was final. With that, the conversation was over. The black sage stood silently, looking down at Soo-hyuk, who lay on the stone slab, ready for whatever came next. The decision was made. The black sage's voice boomed, accepting Soo-hyuk's unwavering choice. A dark, twisted grin spread across his face. It was clear he wasn't just granting a wish. He was enjoying the price that would come with it. Holding the glowing orb, the black sage began the ritual. Dark, purple energy erupted from him, swirling violently. He announced to young Soo-hyuk that he, the greatest sorcerer on the continent, would fulfill his wish. But it came with a cruel twist. He would take everything from him in the process, laughing like a madman. But as the powerful magic began to consume him, Soo-hyuk just lay there, completely calm. A small smile played on his lips as he thought to himself that the sorcerer was truly a madman. Still, as his consciousness began to fade, one last thought crossed his mind. There was something more he wanted to say to the black sage, but it was already too late. As his mind faded, he realized there was one last thing he'd wanted to tell the sorcerer for a long, long time. But it was too late to say it now. Everything went white. It felt like his entire being was being pulled through a needle-thin thread, stretching across time and space. And then, a sound, a steady, rhythmic beeping. He wasn't in the Huan continent anymore. He was in a hospital bed, with tubes in his arm and a machine monitoring his heart. Slowly, very slowly, his eyes began to flutter open. Consciousness was returning to him, piece by piece. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. He thought to himself, completely stunned. What is this? Did that bastard's spell actually succeed? His fingers twitched. He was still thinking about the sorcerer, wondering if the spell had actually worked. If it failed, he swore he'd find that guy and teach him a lesson he'd never forget. Suddenly, a blinding light flooded his senses. It was so bright, it felt like a small sun had exploded right in front of his face. His eyes shot open with a gasp. He was awake, truly awake. He looked around the room, totally bewildered. The beeping machines, the IV drip in his arm. He had no idea where he was. Then his eyes landed on a calendar hanging on the wall. The writing. It was Korean. It hit him all at once. This was a hospital on Earth. He was finally home. A small, relieved smile spread across Soo-hyuk's face. After all that time, after everything he'd been through, it was real. He was back. The thought echoed in his mind, a powerful wave of certainty. He had actually done it. He had come back home. He tried to clench his fist, to feel something solid, but a sudden, sharp jolt shot through his arm. Something was very wrong. He tried to push himself up, but an unbelievable wave of pain washed over him, so intense it almost made him black out. Every muscle screamed. Panic started to set in as he felt his body trembling uncontrollably. He realized his condition was terrible, far worse than he imagined. After everything he'd done to get back, he thought he might actually die right here in this hospital bed. The weakness was overwhelming. A chilling thought crept into his mind. This wasn't the kind of exhaustion you get from lying down for a day or two. Something was seriously wrong. His mind flashed back to the black sage. He remembered how confident that sorcerer was, promising he could send him back to the very moment he left Earth. There was supposed to be no time lost at all. Looking at his frail hand, the truth hit him like a punch. The sage had failed. He hadn't pinpointed the right time at all. He'd been lying here, helpless, for who knows how long. A surge of anger went through him. He couldn't believe he'd trusted that quack sorcerer. The memory of the man's smug face just made him even more furious. But getting angry wouldn't solve anything. He knew he couldn't do a single thing in this state. His first and only goal right now had to be recovering, even just a little bit of his strength. He knew exactly what to do. It was time to use his innate land technique. This was an internal energy method he'd created himself back on the Huan continent, designed specifically to restore the body's vitality. Slowly, he pushed himself into a sitting position. As he did, a faint blue energy began to swirl around him, the first sign of his old power returning. He closed his eyes, shutting out the sterile hospital room and focusing entirely inward. The energy flowing through him grew stronger and brighter as he concentrated. He moved into a cross-legged position on the bed. A moment later, a powerful wave of energy burst from his body, filling the entire room with a brilliant purple light. This was the true power of the martial emperor. The effect was immediate. The muscles in his arms, which had grown weak and useless over the years, began to tense and swell. His body was already rebuilding itself, returning to the powerful form he once had. The energy wasn't just around him anymore. It was surging through him. Every muscle, every bone was being flooded with this incredible power, fixing years of damage in just a few moments. The purple light slowly faded, and he let out a long breath. When Su Hayuk opened his eyes, they were glowing with that same intense energy. The martial emperor was finally awake. He stood up and rotated his shoulder, feeling a satisfying crack as everything settled back into place. The weakness was gone. His body felt like his own again. He looked at his reflection, a confident smile on his face. The innate land technique had worked perfectly, just as he'd designed it. For the first time in 5 years, he actually felt alive. With his strength returned, he sat on the edge of the bed, completely composed. It was time to deal with the outside world. He decided his first step was to call for a nurse. He calmly reached out and pressed the call button for the nurse. It was the first simple step to figuring out what had happened to him. But the moment his finger touched the button, a bright blue screen flashed into existence right in front of his face. It was some kind of system, welcoming him as a newly awakened one and telling him to protect his world. He stumbled back, completely stunned. What was this thing? Before he could even process the first message, another one popped up. The system informed him that he had acquired an A-rank skill, the innate land technique. Su Hayuk just stared at the screen, totally silent. His mind was racing. Awakened. A system. Skills. This was his own technique. Something he'd created from scratch. The world he'd returned to was clearly not the same one he'd left. Getting annoyed with the whole thing, he just swatted the blue screen away like it was an annoying bug. He didn't have time for this nonsense. He needed answers, and this weird floating window was just getting in his way. He brought a trembling hand to his face. The ache was real, sharp, and undeniable. This wasn't a dream. The pain was far too clear for that. This was really happening. And then a small, humorless laugh escaped his lips. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was the sound of someone realizing just how completely screwed they were. The laugh quickly turned into fury. He shot up in bed, shouting into the empty hospital room, his voice filled with rage. He cursed the Black Sage, the one who had promised to send him home to the world he'd left behind. His eyes landed on the glowing blue screen again, flashing the message about his new skill. He could almost see the smug face of the Black Sage floating outside the window. This weird system. It was proof. Something had gone seriously, terribly wrong. And then another screen popped up, forcing a status window right in his face. It had his name, Yang Su Hyu, and his age, 27. But then came the weird part. It said he was a level 1 martial artist with a strength of only 1. A system error message was flashing, saying it was trying to stabilize. For the most powerful man in the world, these numbers were a complete joke. Su Hye stared at the floating words, his mind racing. He wondered what on earth this thing could be. It was too solid, too real to be some kind of magic trick or illusion. He knew magic, and this wasn't it. He also knew it wasn't a ghost or some kind of spirit. After spending so long in the martial world, he admitted he was pretty out of touch with modern technology. A frightening thought crossed his mind. What if the Black Sage messed up and sent him to a world that just looked like Earth, but wasn't the real one? But then he looked down at the tag on his wrist. It had his name, Yang Su Hyu, and his exact date of birth. He realized that for both of those things to be identical was just too much of a coincidence. This had to be his world. With that settled, His confusion turned into pure annoyance. He glared at the screen, his patience completely gone. He shouted at the floating window, demanding to know when it was going to disappear and telling it to just go away already. But as soon as he yelled at it, the blue screen actually started to flicker and break apart. Soo-hya just watched, completely caught off guard. He hadn't expected it to do anything at all, and then it was just gone. He stared at the empty air, his mind trying to catch up. He couldn't believe it. He wondered if the strange window had actually responded to his word. But just as he was thinking that, the system window flashed back into existence, right in front of his face. The sudden return made him jump, his eyes wide with shock. Not wasting a second, he tested his theory. He yelled for it to disappear again, and instantly, the window vanished in a bright burst of light. He sat there in the quiet room, a hand on his chin as he tried to make sense of it. This wasn't some kind of martial arts technique or ancient magic. The only thing he could compare it to was something he'd only ever seen in movies or video games. He finally came to a heavy conclusion. One thing was absolutely certain. This wasn't the world he used to live in. A cold sweat trickled down his face. His mind was racing, trying to piece together what could have possibly happened. Everything felt wrong. Just then, the sound of his door sliding open cut through the silence. He looked up and saw two nurses in the hallway, chatting next to a cart. His expression changed in an instant. This was perfect. He realized they were his first real chance to figure out what was going on. He sat up and raised his hand with a friendly smile. He called out to get their attention, trying to sound as harmless as possible. The two nurses turned toward the sound of his voice, their faces breaking into warm smiles as they noticed him. The nurses' eyes went wide with shock. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. One of them stammered his name, completely stunned that the patient, Yang Soo-hyuk, was actually conscious. Soo-hyuk just looked back at them, completely puzzled. He didn't understand why they were freaking out. To him, he had just woken up. He couldn't figure out why it was causing such a big scene. The shock quickly turned into action. One of the nurses shouted that she was going to get the doctor and immediately took off running down the hall. The other one stayed behind, keeping a close eye on him. A little while later, a doctor arrived and began checking Soo-hyuk's condition. He shined a bright light into his eye, asking if he felt any unusual pain or if any part of his body wouldn't move. Soo-hyuk calmly told him that he felt perfectly fine. The doctor looked surprised, making a note on his clipboard. He said that Soo-hyuk's physical responses were perfect, which was amazing considering it had been 5 years since something called the portal impact. At that moment, Soo-hyuk's world stopped. His eyes shot open in disbelief as he stared at the doctor. He immediately demanded to know if he had really just said 5 years. The doctor calmly confirmed it. Yes, it had been 5 years since Yang Soo-hyuk lost consciousness. Soo-hyuk just stared, his mind racing. He held up his fingers, trying to make sense of the number. If 5 whole years had passed, then that could only mean one thing. Pushing his glasses up, the doctor delivered the final blow. He told him the current year was 2028. The words hit Soo-hyuk like a physical strike. His eyes shot wide open, the reality of his situation crashing down on him all at once. That shock quickly curdled into pure rage. His hand clenched the hospital sheets so tightly, his knuckles turned white. He silently cursed that damned black sage, the one who always bragged about his magic. To Soo-hyuk, the sage was nothing but a liar who spouted nonsense. He seethed, thinking that if he could ever return to the Huan continent, he would twist the sage's neck himself. The doctor, completely unaware of the storm inside his patient's head, simply told him that while he must have questions, his stability was the priority for now. The doctor suggested he get some rest first, and that they could talk in more detail once he'd regained his strength. Soo-hyuk didn't fight back. He just sat on the edge of the bed with his head lowered, the anger gone. All that was left was the heavy silence and the weight of 5 lost years. The doctor turned and walked out, leaving Soo-hyuk alone in the quiet room. He just sat there, staring down at his hands, the weight of those 5 lost years pressing down on him. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. Just then, a nurse entered the room. She had a gentle smile and told him she understood this was a huge shock and that he should try to rest. Then she said something that cut through all his despair. She had already contacted his family, and they would be there soon. The word family hit him like a physical blow. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and hope. After all this time, after everything he'd been through, the thought of seeing them again felt unreal. The nurse confirmed it with a kind nod. She explained that while he was unconscious, his family had been incredibly devoted. They took turns visiting him almost every single day, showing everyone at the hospital just how much they loved him. The words echoed in his mind. Almost every every day for 5 years. A wave of guilt and gratitude washed over him. All thoughts of the Black Sage and the Huan continent vanished. He looked up at the nurse, his voice filled with an urgency he hadn't felt since waking up, and asked if she knew when they would arrive. The nurse explained that they had called his family about an hour ago, so they should be arriving any minute now. The word soon hung in the air, filled with 5 years of waiting. And at that very moment, the door to his room slid open with a whoosh. A young woman stumbled in, breathing hard as if she had run the entire way here. It was clear she had dropped everything to get to him. The nurse turned back to Soo-hyuk with a warm smile. She told him that his younger sister had arrived first. Then she turned to the girl and formally introduced him, as if he were a stranger returning after a long time. For a moment, there was just silence. Then she took a slow, deliberate step forward, and then another. It wasn't a rush of joy, but a careful, almost fearful approach, as if she was afraid he might disappear. She stood there, her eyes wide and already filling with tears. Her entire body was trembling slightly. Looking right at him, she finally spoke, her voice shaking as she asked if he was really awake, if this was truly real. Soo-hyuk gave her a warm, gentle smile. He tried to lighten the mood, confirming that he was real. Then he looked at her closely and joked that she was the one who was surprising him. He remembered her as a little kid, but now she'd grown into a young woman. A single tear rolled down his sister's cheek. It was finally sinking in. This wasn't a dream. She whispered to herself that he was real, that her brother was actually awake and talking to her after all this time. Soo-hyuk started to say something else, but he never got the chance to finish. In a sudden burst of emotion, his sister lunged forward and threw her arms around his neck, holding on tight. All the years of waiting and worrying came out in that one hug. He was a little taken aback by the suddenness of it all, but as she held on to him, a soft, peaceful expression settled on his face. This was what he had crossed worlds for. For the first time in a very long time, he felt like he was home. The emotional moment was suddenly broken by the nurse. Seeing the girl lunge at the patient, she panicked. She rushed forward with her hand out, telling Sua to be careful and not to harm the patient who had just woken up. But his sister didn't seem to hear the nurse at all. She just held on tighter, refusing to let go. Soo-hyuk, still a little surprised by it all, awkwardly patted her on the back, a warm smile on his face. All the pain and fear from the last 5 years came pouring out at once. Through her sobs, she told him that she'd almost given up hope, that she truly believed she would never see him again. Soo-hyuk held her close, his expression full of warmth and regret. He gently comforted her, apologizing for making her wait so long, for being late to return to her side. The nurse stood silently by the bed, giving them their space. The room was quiet for a moment, just filled with the feeling of two siblings finally being together again after so much time apart. After a little while, his sister finally pulled back, wiping the tears from her eyes. Her worry immediately shifted to his health. She asked if his body hurt, explaining that she'd heard people who wake up after a portal impact usually suffer from terrible pain. Soo-hyuk smiled and flexed his arm, trying to show her he was okay. He told her not to worry, joking that if you took away his health, there wouldn't be anything left of him anyway. His sister laughed, but her expression quickly turned back to one of concern. She told him not to exaggerate, still worried that he might suddenly feel intense pain later on. Soo-hyuk grinned and teased her right back, pointing out that if she was so worried, she probably shouldn't have thrown herself at him. Completely flustered, his sister waved her hands defensively, insisting that it wasn't on purpose. Her body just moved on its own. He chuckled, letting her off the hook, but then his expression turned serious. He told her there was something more important he needed to ask. He wanted to know what she meant by a portal impact, a term she'd mentioned before. His sister looked at him, confused for a second. Then it clicked. She repeated the words back to him, suddenly understanding that he was completely in the dark about everything that had happened while he was in a coma. His sister began to explain. 5 years ago, in 2023, a disaster struck the world without any warning. It was like the earth itself was being torn apart, leaving entire cities in ruins. She described a massive earthquake-like catastrophe that shook everything, and in the middle of all that chaos, strange gateways to another world, portals, suddenly started appearing everywhere. She remembered looking up, completely stunned, as these dark, swirling vortexes hung in the sky over the ruined city. It was a sight that changed everything. She went on to explain that while not all of them were the same, most of the worlds on the other side of these portals were dangerous places. They They called them dungeons, and inside these dungeons were monsters, horrible creatures that threatened anyone who dared to enter. This was the new reality of the world he had woken up in. She continued, explaining that these dungeons were filled with monsters, but at the same time, people with special abilities began to appear. They called them awakeners, and they were the only ones who could fight back. In just 5 short years, the entire world had become something completely different. Back in the hospital room, his sister finished her story. She told him that the moment when all the portals first appeared is now known as the portal impact. Soo-hyuk was quiet for a moment, letting it all sink in. Monsters, awakeners, the portal impact. He admitted to himself that this was a lot to take in at once. Seeing the look on his face, his sister tried to calm him down. She told him not to overthink it, promising that he'd be able to learn everything he needed to know once he was discharged from the hospital. As he processed everything she'd told him, a thought clicked in Soo-hyuk's mind. That strange blue window that had appeared. It had to be related to these awakeners. He made a mental note to look into it as soon as he got out of the hospital, but until then, he decided it was best to keep this whole thing a secret. It felt too risky to talk about something he didn't fully understand yet. Revealing it could be a huge mistake. Lost in his thoughts, he didn't notice his sister watching him. She saw the serious look on his face and asked him what was wrong. Soo-hyuk quickly snapped out of it, telling her it was nothing. He decided to change the subject, turning his attention to her. He asked if she was in college now, but her hesitation told him something was off. She looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Quietly, she admitted that she never went to university. The weight of that simple statement hung in the air between them. Soo-hyuk stared, completely baffled. He asked her why, reminding her that she'd always been a top student. But as the words left his mouth, a horrible, sinking feeling began to wash over him. A dark realization started to form. He looked down, his voice filled with dread, as he asked the one question he was terrified to hear the answer to. Was it because of him? She immediately tried to deny it, her eyes darting away from his. She claimed that studying just got boring, and she wanted to make money instead. But the way she nervously fiddled with her hands told a completely different story. Soo-hyuk saw right through it. He knew it was a lie, a kind one meant to spare his feelings. The truth was obvious, and now he had to decide what to do with it. A part of him wondered if it was better to just pretend he didn't notice. She must have seen the doubt on his face, because she insisted she was being serious. But Soo-hyuk just stared back, his expression full of suspicion. He wasn't convinced at all. Sensing that he wasn't going to let it go, his sister quickly changed the subject, announcing that their mom and dad would be home soon. Soo-hyuk recognized the dodge for what it was, but decided to drop it. For now, he'd play along, even as she insisted she was telling the truth. The clock on the wall ticked forward. His parents would be here soon. Mother, father. The thought of seeing them again after 5 long years filled him with a mix of anticipation and dread. As he waited, his mind drifted back to the past. It felt like a lifetime ago, but he remembered his relationship with his mother was always pretty good. But his father, that was a different story entirely. Their relationship was the worst it could be, and it all came down to one thing. His dad was a writer. He wasn't just one kind of writer either. He'd try his hand at everything. Sometimes he was a poet, other times a novelist, or even a critic. Soo-hyuk remembered it clearly. As a little kid, he'd often find his dad completely absorbed in his work, and he'd just stand there, trying to get his attention. His father would always give him the same response without even turning around. He'd pat Soo-hyuk on the head and promise to play with him as soon as he was done, telling him to just wait a little longer. And every time, the young boy would just agree. But his father was always too busy, completely focused on his writing. So Soo-hyuk would just sit there, waiting for a moment of his dad's time that never seemed to come. As he got older, he started to understand the hard truth. He began to wonder what happens to a writer who never becomes successful. The answer was simple, and it was brutal. It meant a life of being poor, of always struggling to make ends meet. There were always papers like this around the house, constant reminders of the money they didn't have. Growing up like that, seeing his family struggle, Soo-hyuk couldn't help but hate it. That simple hatred grew into a deep resentment for his father and the life he'd chosen for them. He remembered a specific day, a confrontation he'd had with his father. His dad was at his desk, as usual, surrounded by his work. He looked up, a little surprised, and greeted his son, asking when he got home. The man just smiled and offered to fix dinner right away. But Soo-hyuk didn't move from the doorway. He just stood there, clutching one of those yellow papers in his hand. And then all that built-up anger just exploded out of him. He screamed at his dad, asking how long he was going to keep writing those worthless stories. He demanded to know if his father wasn't embarrassed, and how long he planned on making them live like this. But his father didn't yell back. He He just looked at him with a calm, almost tired smile. He explained that writing was just a hobby now because he was working another job that night. The man tried to calm his son down, telling him not to worry so much. He offered to make his favorite meal, curry, hoping to just share a quiet dinner together. But Soo-hyuk wasn't having it. He shouted back that he didn't want any, that he was just sick of everything. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the room. His father reached out, calling his name desperately, trying to stop him from leaving, but it was no use. The man just stood there alone, his head bowed. He let out a heavy, completely defeated. And that was the moment everything changed. Soo-hyuk remembered with deep regret that in the end, his father gave up writing, the dream he had held onto his entire life. The memories kept coming back, one after another. This time, he remembered his father bringing home a box of fried chicken. It was a simple thing, but it was meant to be a special treat for the whole family. He remembered the look on his dad's face, so full of joy and excitement. He called out happily for Soo-hyuk and his sister, Soo-ah, to come and eat together. But as his father set the food down, Soo-hyuk wasn't even paying attention. He was just standing in the corner, staring at his phone, completely ignoring the gesture. His dad looked over, a bit confused by the cold shoulder. His father asked where he was going, wondering if he wasn't going to eat with them. Without even looking back, Soo-hyuk just said he was leaving for a party with his friends. Even then, his dad just forced a smile. He tried to act like it was okay, saying that hanging out with friends was important too. Then, he reached into his pocket, offering his son some money to go out. He explained that this was emergency money he had saved up, but he wanted Soo-hyuk to have it. He just wanted his son to buy something nice for himself. But Soo-hyuk smacked his hand away, refusing the money completely. He yelled that he didn't need it. He mocked his dad for trying to give him an allowance when they were already struggling, calling the whole thing pathetic. The words hit his father hard. He just stood there, completely stunned and hurt, unable to respond. But Soo-hyuk wasn't finished. He looked right at him and said the cruelest thing he could think of, that if he wasn't around, the family would have been much happier. And then he delivered the final blow. He told his dad to stop trying to act like a father now. His father just stood there, completely still. Looking back on that moment, Soo-hyuk was filled with nothing but shame. He knew that back then, he was a fool, an idiot, a real piece of trash. A terrible thought crept into his mind. What if that was the last time he ever spoke to his father? Suddenly, he wasn't thinking about his own anger anymore. He was just worried, wondering if his dad even had any money on him. He asked himself a hard question. If he had known what was coming, would he have reacted differently? As the image of his father walking away alone filled his memory, he knew the answer. Probably not. The person he was back then was just too stubborn and too foolish. He knew it now, with perfect clarity. Back then, he wasn't just immature. He was a complete and utter fool. As his father walked away that night, a strange, pulsing purple light suddenly appeared in the street. He stopped, the unnatural glow catching his eye. His expression turned serious, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He looked up, and his breath caught in his throat. A swirling vortex of dark purple energy was tearing a hole in the air right above him. He was paralyzed with fear, his mind struggling to understand what he was seeing. And then, at that moment, a figure started to descend from the center of the dark energy. As Soo-hyuk was pulled into the swirling purple energy, his father screamed his name from the ground, his voice filled with pure terror. The reflection in his father's eye showed the last thing he ever saw of his son, a boy being swallowed by a strange, dark power. At that moment, all Soo-hyuk could think about was him. His father reached out, trying desperately to grab him, but it was useless. Soo-hyuk's voice echoed in his memory, explaining that from the second he fell into the Hwan continent, and even to this day, he felt himself just falling, tumbling through an endless, dark void. He just kept sinking, disappearing into nothing, and his mind was filled with a single, overwhelming thought, that he regretted it. He regretted it over and over again. He'd always thought the very first thing he'd do when he got back was apologize to his father. But as he sat there in the hospital bed, the reality hit him. 5 years had already passed. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by the sound of the door opening. A moment later, a plastic bag dropped to the floor with a thud. Standing in the doorway were his parents. His mother's hand flew to her mouth as she cried out his name, her voice trembling. His father stood right beside her, just as stunned. Without another thought, they rushed towards his bed. His mother reached out for him, tears in her eyes, exclaiming that he was really, truly awake. A warm smile spread across Soo-hyuk's face. He looked at his mother and calmly confirmed that yes, he was awake now. His mother held onto his hand, tears streaming down her face. She was so relieved, repeating how thankful she was. She admitted that she was terrified she would never see him wake up again. Her relief quickly turned to worry. She gently asked him if his body was okay, her voice still trembling with emotion. His father stepped closer, echoing the same concern. He asked if Soo-hyuk was in pain anywhere. Seeing his dad, Soo-hyuk was overcome with emotion, barely able to speak his name. But before Soo-hyuk could say anything more, his father started to apologize. His voice was heavy with regret, as he said he was sorry for not earning more money, blaming himself for not being able to afford better treatment. Soo-hyuk immediately shook his head, insisting that wasn't true. He told his father that he was the one who was sorry, that it was all his fault. He confessed that he'd been a fool who said cruel things, even though their family had been happy because of his father's hard work. He looked his father in the eyes and explained that while he was asleep, he'd regretted his past actions over and over. With total sincerity, he apologized and promised he would never say such hurtful things again. His father's expression softened, a gentle smile appearing on his face. Overcome with emotion, his father leaned forward and pulled Soo-hyuk into a tight hug. As they embraced, his mother and sister stood by, watching the touching reunion. His sister, however, tried to play it cool. She wiped a tear from her eye, but had a small smile on her face as she wondered aloud why her troublemaker brother was suddenly acting so nice. She threw her hands up in a comical fit, yelling that it was annoying, but also nice. Then she repeated it, saying it was nice, but also incredibly annoying. Her outburst completely broke the serious mood in the room. Soo-hyuk couldn't help but smile. He wiped away a tear of his own, quietly amused by his sister's weird logic. It felt good to be home. His parents just laughed, telling him to just try and understand his sister's strange ways of showing she's happy. Soo-hyuk watched them with a small smile, quietly joking that she seemed even worse than she was before he went into a coma. Of course, his sister heard him. She immediately spun around and started playfully hitting him, demanding to know what he just said. Soo-hyuk just laughed, reminding her that he was still a patient and she should go easy on him. Looking at his family, Soo-hyuk felt a deep sense of peace. He was truly glad he came back. After all his conquests and battles, he realized the happiness he always wanted was right here, in this room, with them. 3 days passed after that emotional reunion. Soo-hyuk finally completed all his discharge paperwork. After 5 long years, he walked out of the hospital, ready to face the world again. As they waited for the bus, Soo-hyuk thought back to his conversation with the doctor. The man had been completely shocked. He couldn't wrap his head around how someone could be perfectly healthy after being stuck in a bed for 5 years. The doctor had even asked him if he was awakened, but Soo-hyuk decided to keep that a secret. He didn't know enough about his own situation yet, and telling a doctor he barely knew felt like a huge risk. But he did get something good out of it. The doctor was fascinated by his body's strange self-healing ability and wanted to research it. So, he made an offer. If Soo-hyuk came back for a checkup once a month, the hospital would cover half of his medical expenses. A small smile crossed his face. He felt like he'd managed to do something good for his family the moment he woke up. Or maybe it was more like he was finally starting to repay the massive debt he owed them. He knew it was all thanks to his innate land technique. Whatever the reason, he was just happy that he'd managed to save his family a lot of money. It was a perfect start. Finally, the bus ride ended. Soo-hyuk felt a wave of relief. After 5 long years, he was finally home. His sister pointed up cheerfully, telling him that this was their home. Soo-hyuk just stared, completely lost. This wasn't the place he remembered at all. He looked up at the plain, red brick building. It looked more like a small warehouse than a place to live. He asked again, his voice hesitant, if this was really their home. His sister just nodded and said they lived on the top floor. The moment they stepped inside, the truth hit him like a punch to the gut. The apartment was tiny and cluttered. His sister tried to explain it away, saying that due to some circumstances, this is where they ended up. But Soo-hyuk knew exactly what those circumstances were. As she fumbled for a light switch, she told him he could use one of the rooms. She mentioned that their mom and dad didn't come in much anyway. The words just hung in the air. Not only had they lost their home, but it sounded like they had lost their family too. He just stood there, taking it all in. He knew his family had struggled with money before he fell into a coma. But this was different. This was a level of poverty he'd never imagined for them. Standing alone in the dark, a horrible thought started to creep in. He had already cost his sister her future. Now, seeing this place, he had to wonder, was this his fault too? The answer hit him with brutal certainty. Of course it was his fault. The hospital bills from his 5-year coma must have destroyed them financially. As the realization sank in, his hand clenched into a tight, shaking fist. But that guilt quickly burned away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. A fire lit in his eyes. He knew what he had to do now. He needed to make money, a lot of it, and fast. There was no other choice. He would do whatever it took, all for his family's sake. A new day brought a new sense of hope, but Soo-hyuk knew the path forward wouldn't be easy. It was a steep climb, and he was starting from the very bottom. So he started running. As he pushed himself, his mind was crystal clear. In this suddenly changed world, there was one obvious way to earn a lot of money, and fast. He forced his legs to move, gasping for every breath. The path he had to take was simple. He had to become a hunter. He knew there were guardians who protected the earth, and that was an honorable job. But hunters were the ones who undoubtedly made more money. For him, the choice was obvious. He kept going, his body drenched in sweat. His mind was made up. The problem, however, was the immediate state he was in. But the reality of his situation hit him hard. He couldn't even think about becoming a hunter in this condition. Just running for a few minutes had left him completely exhausted, gasping for air. Just then, a blue window appeared in front of his eyes. The system told him his physical contamination level was at 90%, a direct result of being asleep for so long. At that moment, everything clicked. This was the reason his body felt so incredibly weak. He knew some monsters were supposed to be easy targets, but the thought of getting injured and causing his family even more pain was something he couldn't stand. It would be the greatest disrespect to everything they'd sacrificed for him. So he made up his mind. Until he was absolutely certain he was ready, he had to improve his condition. He pushed himself to run again, and as he did, a new message popped up. His contamination level had already dropped to 89.9%. A confident smile crossed his face. It was working. Even light exercise was lowering the level, which meant he could definitely overcome this if he kept at it. Most importantly, he remembered he had a secret weapon that no one else did, his mastery of martial arts. For the next 15 days, Soo-hyuk pushed himself without a single break. His goal was simple: build up his basic physical endurance as quickly as possible. Day after day, he ran until his lungs burned and his legs felt like they were about to give out. He was completely focused, pushing through the pain. He knew from his time on the Hwan continent that simple running and the horse stance were the best ways to build a strong foundation. He was confident that this was the right approach to get his body back in shape. After all that training, he finally stopped to check his progress. A blue window popped up, showing his physical contamination level was now at 86.8%. His face fell. He couldn't believe it. After 2 solid weeks of intense training, the level had only dropped from around 89 to 86%. This was nowhere near fast enough. He looked back over his shoulder, a grim expression on his face. He knew this wasn't going to work. His current training pace was just too slow. He knew he needed a more drastic approach. As he walked up the steep stairs toward his home, all he could think about was his family. He imagined his parents and his sister working themselves to the bone, all because of him. The images of their struggle filled his mind. His father in a hard hat, his mother and sister looking exhausted. He clenched his jaw, sweat beading on his face. No matter what, he had to get results within a few days. Enough to become a hunter. Time was a luxury he didn't have. He stopped on the stairs, planting his feet firmly. He took a deep breath, getting ready. He was done with the slow and steady approach. It was time to use something he'd been saving. He closed his eyes, focusing all of his energy inward. A faint blue aura began to glow around him as he activated his most powerful skill, the innate land technique. This was the drastic measure he needed. He knew this technique was special. Back on the Hwan continent, the innate land technique was known as the best of all the basic martial arts. But what most people didn't know was that it had a second, hidden ability that went far beyond its normal use. It was called the awakening ability. If he pushed his body to its absolute limit, or even past it, while using the technique, the energy of nature would flood his body and basically give him a fresh start. The problem was, pushing yourself that far was almost impossible for a normal person. In fact, it was so difficult that across the entire Hwan continent, only 3 people had ever even discovered this hidden function. With that thought, he started running again, pushing himself harder up the stairs. He knew it was a greedy, desperate move, but he didn't care. This was what he had to do. He knew that without this burning desire, he wouldn't be able to achieve anything for his family. With that thought hardening his resolve, He decided he would challenge his absolute limits. He pushed off the ground and sprinted forward with everything he had. At that same moment, an old man was slowly making his way down the stairs. He leaned heavily on his cane, grunting as he complained about how much his knees were hurting him. But then he paused. Something caught his attention, and he looked up, a puzzled expression on his face. What he saw was Soo-hyuk flying up the stairs like a gust of wind. The old man just stared, completely amazed by the incredible energy he was seeing. He let out a little wishing he could have that kind of strength again. Soo-hyuk didn't notice anyone watching him. His breathing was heavy, his legs were burning, but his mind was clear. He made a promise to himself. He wouldn't stop, no matter what. He pushed himself harder and harder, his lungs burning with every breath. Sweat poured down his face, but he didn't even think about wiping it away. All that mattered was the next step. His body was screaming at him to stop, to just take a moment to breathe, but his mind was made up. He told himself firmly that he would not rest. A fire lit up in his eyes, burning away all the pain and exhaustion. This wasn't just training anymore. He made a silent, unbreakable promise to himself. He would never, ever give up. In his mind, he saw the path ahead clearly. It was a long, dark staircase with no end in sight, but he knew this was the only way. If surpassing his limits was the only way to get what he wanted, then he was prepared to do it. He would break through his limits again and again, as many times as it took. No matter what, he would reach the top. He remembered who he was, not just some guy in a hospital bed, but the man who stood at the absolute peak. He saw himself as the martial emperor, sitting on a throne high above a staircase lined with countless fallen warriors. That was the power he once had. A small confident smile appeared on his face. That absolute unstoppable will was why they called him the martial emperor of Ilcheon. He directed the thought to the one who sent him here, the Black Sage, as if to remind him who he was dealing with. And somewhere, maybe in another time or place, the Black Sage remembered that same look. He knew exactly how determined Soo-hyuk could be, thinking to himself that the man was nothing short of a crazy bastard. That same crazy determination was all he had now. As the sun began to rise, Soo-hyuk was still pushing himself, running up the endless stairs. His lungs burned and his legs ached, but he just kept going. The sun set and the sky turned dark, but for Soo-hyuk, nothing had changed. He was still running, still pushing past the pain. He had been at this for hours, refusing to stop until he had broken through every single one of his body's limits. His training was so intense that he started to draw attention. From a balcony above, two older men watched him run. They wondered out loud how many laps he'd done, pointing out that he'd been running non-stop despite looking so physically weak. The other man agreed, saying that no matter the reason, his determination was impressive. He let out a wishing his own son would stop playing games and put in even a little of that kind of effort. His friend just teased him, saying he probably needed the exercise more himself. The man just grumbled back, telling him to shut it. All the while, the moon climbed higher in the sky and the night grew darker. Long after their conversation ended, the only sound that broke the silence of the night was Soo-hyuk, gasping and struggling for every single breath. He was at his absolute limit. His body was screaming at him to stop, but he just gritted his teeth, his hand shaking as he gripped the railing. He told himself he just had to push a little more, refusing to give in. The night grew deeper, the sky filled with stars. The world was quiet, but for Soo-hyuk, the struggle wasn't over yet. He stared up at the next flight of stairs, his breath coming out in ragged clouds. Every muscle in his body was screaming at him to stop, but he just pushed the thought away. He told himself he just had to go a little bit further. He pushed his body past any normal limit, sweat pouring down his face, and that's when he felt it. Something inside him was changing. A faint, blue energy began to flow from him, cool against his skin. The energy grew stronger, swirling around his body like a small storm. He leaned against the railing, completely drained, but the power inside him was just getting started. This was the breakthrough he'd been pushing for, and then he felt it. The exhaustion and pain were washed away by a sudden surge of strength. A brilliant blue light exploded from his chest, sending cracks of pure energy across his entire body. He had finally done it. He could feel it. The goal he'd been pushing for, the next level of his power, was just within reach. A fire lit in his eyes, which were now glowing with that same blue energy. He knew that if he could just push a little bit harder, just one more step, he would break through for sure. With that final burst of resolve, he charged up the stairs, the blue energy flowing around him like a river. And at that moment, a message appeared. The system itself was responding to his sheer willpower. He stopped in his tracks, his eyes fixed on the blue screen that had just popped up in front of him. This was it, the reward for for all that pain and effort. The system announced his reward, a permanent boost to his strength and stamina. He looked down at his hand, clenching his fist. He could already feel the difference. A wave of new power was flowing through him, making his whole body feel stronger than before. And then, the system responded with a flood of messages. Turns out, his intense effort had unlocked a hidden function of his innate land technique. His power didn't just go up a little bit. It jumped to a whole new level. Not only that, but the bad stuff that had been building up in his body dropped by a huge amount. The system itself seemed impressed, noting that his strong will was what caused all this to happen. The final confirmation screen popped up, and it was exactly what he'd been fighting for. He was now level 2. A small, confident smile appeared on his face. All that pain had been worth it, but the rewards didn't stop there. The system also announced that all his stamina was restored, and every injury he had was gone. Looking at his arm, he could see it was true. He felt a huge wave of relief wash over him. Finally, he was back at full strength. With his body healed and his power increased, he took a firm step forward. It was a simple movement, but it felt completely different now. He was stronger, and he knew it. He ended up on the rooftop, just looking out over the city lights. After all that struggle, he stood there in the quiet of the night. This was the world he had to conquer now, not for power, but for his family, and he finally had the strength to begin. He let out a huge shout, throwing his hands in the air. It was a cry of victory, a release of all the pain and pressure he'd been holding in after pushing himself to the absolute limit. As his shout faded, a confident grin spread across his face. He knew he could do it, and it seemed the system agreed, with a message popping up saying it respected him for his incredible effort. The rewards kept coming. His innate land technique had given him a new passive skill, Iron Bone. On top of that, the system granted him a special personal stat called willpower. He realized he hadn't just activated a special effect. He'd earned extra rewards on top of it all. A look of pure resolve crossed his face. This was what he needed. With this new strength, he could finally start working as a hunter. The next morning, the city was bustling with a new day. For Suhayuk, it was the start of everything. With his body stronger than ever and his mind set, Suhayuk was ready. He stood outside, his expression firm and serious. This was it, the beginning of his new path to save his family. He arrived at a massive skyscraper that seemed to touch the clouds. This was the Hunter Association, the place where his new life would officially begin. The sheer size of the building was a clear sign of how much the world had changed. He walked through the busy lobby, heading further inside. He'd planned on getting here early in the morning, but it turned out registering his new skills took a lot longer than he'd expected. He pressed the button for the 3rd floor, where the Hunter Registration Department was. As he waited, he thought about the whole concept of skills. To be honest, it all felt very strange to him. In his old world, power came from endless training and deep understanding. But here, people gained abilities without any of that. It was a power you could use without ever mastering martial arts or magic. And for a supreme warrior like him, that was a truly bizarre idea. As he rode the elevator up, he thought about how bizarre this whole skill system was. Because he was so new to it, his skill window had been completely empty that morning. The only thing listed was his innate land technique, a power he had trained in for years by himself. The elevator dinged, signaling their arrival. He'd looked into it and learned that most hunters started with at least 3 skills, which sent him into a bit of a panic. So, he quickly practiced a few of his old martial techniques, and to his surprise, they all turned into registered skills, and the result was a lot. The system showed a huge list of A-rank skills he now had: innate land technique, iron fist staff, wind step kick, mad ghost rampage, and even an A+ gale step. The list just kept going on and on. He nervously touched the side of his face, a bead of sweat forming. In his rush to experiment, he realized he might have learned way too many things at once. For a brand new hunter, this was an insane amount of power to show up with. But then, he pushed that worry aside. Did it really matter? As he walked out of the elevator with firm steps, he decided it didn't. If he wanted to make money for his family, and fast, then standing out was probably a good thing. The elevator doors opened, and Suhayuk stepped out into the hallway. All the hesitation was gone. He had a clear goal, and his mind was made up. It was time to get started. Hey, real quick, my mom said this channel would get 0 subscribers. If you enjoyed this story so far, click subscribe to watch the next part. Inside the registration department, a staff member sat at his desk looking completely drained. He'd been conducting awakener tests all day, and so far, every single person had turned out to be ordinary. It was clearly a repetitive and often disappointing job. Just then, A voice interrupted his thoughts. The man looked up from his computer, his expression still tired and uninterested, as Soo-hyuk stood before his desk. With a calm and steady voice, Soo-hyuk told him that he was there to take the Awakener test. The staff member gestured toward a crystal orb on his desk, without much enthusiasm. He explained the process was simple. Place a hand on it, and if it lights up, you're an Awakener. If not, it was all a mistake, and they should just go home. Soo-hyuk reached for the orb. He figured it must be pretty common for people to mistakenly believe they'd awakened. But for him, there was no doubt at all. He had already seen the system's notification window with his own eyes. He placed his hand on the crystal, and the moment he did, the orb burst with a brilliant blue light. Just as he thought, there was no doubt about it. The staff member's tired expression completely disappeared, replaced by genuine shock. He congratulated Soo-hyuk, confirming he was indeed an Awakener, and promised to help him get registered right away. He handed over a registration form for Soo-hyuk to fill out. Soo-hyuk took it, a little surprised at how fast everything was moving. Just proving he had magical energy seemed to be enough to speed things up. Soo-hyuk sat down at a nearby desk and quietly began filling out the paperwork. Across the room, the staff member went back to his computer, giving him some space to complete the form. A few moments later, he was done. He stood up and handed the completed form back to the official. The section for registered skills was filled with an unusually long list of powerful techniques. The staff member looked over the registration form, and his brow furrowed in annoyance. He cleared his throat to get Soo-hyuk's attention, a hint of suspicion in his eyes. His expression shifted from annoyance to outright disbelief. He held up the paper, his voice shaking a little as he questioned how a level 1 could possibly have 32 registered skills. Soo-hyuk just looked back at him, genuinely confused, and asked if having a lot of skills was some kind of problem. The official just sighed and buried his face in his hand, totally frustrated. He explained that it wasn't that it was forbidden, but that it made absolutely no sense. He figured Soo-hyuk was just overly excited after awakening and told him to stop playing pranks. Soo-hyuk's expression tightened. He knew he might have gone a little overboard when he was testing out his new abilities, but he was still pretty disappointed that the guy just flat out refused to believe him. So, instead of arguing, Soo-hyuk came up with a simple solution. He calmly offered to switch his system window to public mode, which would let the official see all his skills for himself. The staff member looked up from his desk, clearly not expecting that offer. The official was still skeptical. He admitted that sharing a system window was possible, but he couldn't figure out what Soo-hyuk was trying to pull. He just stared, trying to understand the angle. The moment Soo-hyuk made his window public, the official's eye shot open. A bright blue screen appeared right in front of him, displaying an impossibly long list of skills. And these weren't just any skills. They were all incredibly high level. He stumbled back in his chair, his face turning pale. He couldn't believe it. There were definitely more than 10 skills, but that wasn't even the craziest part. Every single one of them was A rank or higher. It was absolute madness. Soo-hyuk just gave him a calm, knowing smile and asked if he believed him now. The official's attitude did a complete 180. He stammered that of course he did, promising to process the registration as quickly and efficiently as possible. The staff member then stood up from his desk and gave Soo-hyuk a deep, formal bow, apologizing for not recognizing his abilities earlier. Soo-hyuk just waved a hand dismissively, telling the guy there was no need to go that far. Turns out, the news of Soo-hyuk's registration traveled fast. The staff member who had handled it was now standing in front of his superior, reporting what he'd seen. The room was big and quiet, with sunlight streaming in through the windows, but the mood was tense. The man behind the desk was Oh Shin-woo, a high-ranking official at the Hunter Association. He sat there silently for a moment, just thinking. He looked down at the documents in his hand, his expression hidden behind his sunglasses. After a moment, he looked up and asked a simple question. Was this report actually true? The staff member flinched, sweat beading on his forehead. He quickly insisted that it was all true. He swore he saw the whole thing with his own 2 eyes, and that there was no denying it. Oh, Shin-woo's gaze fell back to the application form on his desk. He stared at the name written there, letting it sink in. Yang Soo-hyuk. This was the man causing all the commotion. Oh Shin-woo leaned back, a grin spreading across his face. He thought to himself that it had been a long time since such an interesting rookie had shown up. This was definitely going to be fun to watch. Meanwhile, miles away from the association building, Soo-hyuk was running as hard as he could. He sprinted through the streets of a quiet neighborhood, panting heavily with every step. He didn't slow down, his feet pounding against the pavement again and again. Each breath he took was a ragged gasp for air, but he just kept pushing forward. Finally, he stumbled to a stop, bending over with his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. He thought his heart was going to explode. Running all the way from the association to his house had pushed him to his absolute limit. But at that very moment, a familiar blue window popped up in front of him. A message from the system appeared, telling him that his stamina had just increased by 1. His brutal training was already paying off. A wide grin spread across his face. He couldn't help but feel that the system's rewards were just too good. After all that effort, getting stronger instantly was an amazing feeling, and he joked to himself that it was almost too sweet. But his good mood quickly faded as he remembered a major catch. He had assumed he could start hunting and making money right after registering, but it turned out he was completely wrong. The thing is, to officially become a hunter, you couldn't just sign up. Every single person had to complete a basic training course first. The government had put that rule in place for a good reason. Too many people were recklessly rushing into dungeons without any knowledge or preparation, and a lot of them ended up dying. As he finally reached his front door, still breathing hard from the run, this was the problem on his mind. And to make matters worse, there was another problem. The basic hunter training course wasn't something you could just do any time. It only started at the end of each month. He looked at the calendar on the wall. It was October 26th. He quickly did the math in his head and realized that meant he had 5 whole days to wait. 5 days until he could even start the training. As the sound of a shower turning on filled the small bathroom, he thought about how ridiculous it was. A part of him wanted to argue that he didn't need any training, but he knew it was pointless. This was a rule he couldn't get around. So, standing under the hot water, he made a new plan. If he had to wait, he wasn't going to waste a single moment. He decided to use those 5 days to train relentlessly and get his body into the best possible shape. After his shower, he looked at himself in the mirror, drying his hair with a towel. A look of pure determination settled on his face. He knew he had to do this. He had to succeed for his family. But as a small, confident smile appeared on his lips, he admitted it wasn't just for them. After everything that had happened, this was for himself too. This was his new beginning. And just like that, the 5 days he spent training alone flew by. The day of the basic hunter training had finally arrived, and a large crowd of people had gathered on the lawn. Suhayuk scanned the group. He counted about 50 people, which was way more than he expected. He'd heard that most people avoided this training because of how dangerous it was, so the large turnout was a surprise. But after a moment, he just smirked to himself. It really didn't matter how many others were here. Their reasons for coming weren't his problem. Just then, something shot past him in a flash of green energy. His eyes widened in surprise. His calm completely shattered. He felt a powerful force that wasn't there a second ago. He quickly turned his head, trying to figure out what it was. It was gone as quickly as it came, but he was certain he'd just felt some kind of incredible presence move right through the crowd. The crowd was still buzzing, completely unsettled by that sudden flash of movement. Then, a voice cut through the noise, confirming that a total of 48 participants were present. And that's when I saw her. It was just her eyes at first, sharp, piercing, and incredibly focused. You could feel the power behind that gaze. She stood before everyone, a tall, elegant woman with an overwhelming presence. With a clear voice, she ordered the entire group to look straight ahead and pay attention. The moment everyone got a good look at her, the whole place erupted in whispers. People were just stunned. It was a real elf, and she was beautiful. The trainees were completely captivated, but Suhayuk wasn't focused on her appearance. His mind was racing as he put it all together. She was the one who had flashed past him. By the time he even sensed her presence, she was already standing at the front. The thought was deeply unsettling. Even with his martial arts training, he couldn't detect her movements at all. This woman was on a completely different level. He kept thinking about her speed. It wasn't just fast, it was stealthy. He wondered if it was a unique ability that all elves had, or something special to her. But instead of feeling worried or threatened, a small smile appeared on his face. To him, this wasn't scary, it was interesting. At the front of the room, the elf instructor, Shar, was calmly looking over the crowd of trainees. It turns out, Suhayuk wasn't the only one doing some observing. Her eyes scanned the group until they landed on one person in particular. She thought to herself that the man standing there had to be young Suhyuk. She remembered the special request she'd received from the association to pay close attention to him, and she was already impressed. Even though he was only level 1, he had somehow managed to sense her presence. Even for just a moment as she passed by. She was genuinely intrigued. In all her years, she had never seen anyone quite like him, not even among the most promising young elves. A small, confident smile formed on her face. This training was going to be fun. Meanwhile, in the crowd, Suhyuk was just as focused on her. The other trainees were whispering amongst themselves, but he was completely captivated. He'd never seen an elf before, and it was a strange sight, but even he had to admit, she was incredibly beautiful. The quiet murmuring of the crowd was suddenly cut short. The instructor's voice rang out, clear and firm, demanding that everyone quiet down and pay attention. Just like that, the room fell silent. Suhyuk's gaze remained fixed on the front of the room, his expression calm and ready. With everyone's attention now on her, she began her official introduction, greeting all of them. She explained that she was there on a special request from Korea to oversee their training. Then she gave her full name, Shahar Kal Alurit, a grand warrior from a place called Elvenheim. She looked over the group and said she was looking forward to working with them, calling them all Earthlings. With a slight smile, she added that her full name was a bit much to say every time. She told everyone to just call her instructor Shar instead. Hearing this, Suhyuk couldn't help but crack a small smile. He thought to himself that her nickname, Shar, sounded kind of like a puppy's name. He found it pretty cute. But while Suhyuk was amused, others were just completely blown away. One of the female trainees was just staring, her eyes wide with wonder. She couldn't believe how incredibly beautiful the instructor was. Not everyone was so expressive, though. Standing nearby, a man with red hair and a snake tattoo watched everything unfold. He didn't say a word, his face completely unreadable. Instructor Shar stood with her hands on her hips, looking over the group. She understood that everyone must have a lot of questions, especially since she was the first elf to ever help with their training. But since they were short on time, she announced that she would only take the first 3 questions. The words were barely out of her mouth before a hand shot straight up into the air. Someone was clearly very eager to be first. It was a young woman with a huge, bright smile on her face. She practically vibrated with excitement, making it clear she really wanted to be the one to ask the first question. Hyuk watched the girl, a little taken aback by her boundless energy. He couldn't help but wonder if she was just a middle schooler. Instructor Shar smiled faintly at the sight. She appreciated the girl's spirit and pointed right at her, asking for her name. The young woman practically beamed with excitement. With her hand still in the air, she announced loudly that her name was Baek-ah-yeon, and she was 19 years old. Her age sent a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. Everyone was surprised that someone so young was joining the training. Suhyuk quietly corrected himself. Not a middle schooler then, but still just a high schooler. It was unexpected. The instructor's expression was calm and professional. She looked at the young woman, formally greeted her by name, and gave her the floor to ask her question. But instead of asking a question, Baek-ah-yeon just gushed, telling the instructor she was the most beautiful person, no, the most beautiful elf she had ever seen. Instructor Shar just blinked, looking genuinely confused. This was definitely not the kind of question she was expecting to receive. Baek-ah-yeon, however, just giggled to herself, scratching her cheek. She seemed completely pleased with her little outburst. A tight, polite smile formed on Shar's face. She commented on the girl's strange way of speaking, pointing out that she'd asked for a question, not praise for her appearance. Then, her tone became heavy with authority. She declared that she was the first heir of the great Kal Iluriat family. It was a clear statement that she was far more than just a pretty face. Her eyes were cold and serious as she looked down at the trainee. She made it very clear that she'd rather be seen as a warrior than as a woman. Her status and her skill were what mattered, nothing else. With that settled, she dismissed the whole thing and called for the next question. The trainees immediately started whispering amongst themselves. A ripple of excitement and nervousness spreading through the room. This time, a bunch of hands shot up all at once. It seemed like everyone was desperate to ask a real question and make a better impression. But Shar's gaze locked onto one person in particular. She pointed directly at the man with the red hair and the tattoo on his arm. She told him that he was the one who had raised his hand first, and it was his turn to ask. The trainees around him started whispering, surprised that this guy, who had been so quiet, was the one she picked. As the red-haired man got ready to speak, another trainee standing nearby looked him over. He thought to himself that he was a bit old-fashioned, and he really didn't like the look of those tattoos. The man with the red hair ignored the whispers and spoke up clearly. He introduced himself as Jin Chang-hyuk. He then admitted that what he was about to ask might sound strange, especially after coming all this way for the training. With a serious look on his face, he finally asked it. He wanted to know if ex-convicts were allowed to receive the training. He added that he'd read the rules, and it all came down to the instructor's personal decision. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Shar looked at him, him, her expression unreadable. She asked him to clarify what an ex-convict was, wondering if it meant he was a criminal. Then, she cut straight to the point and demanded to know what crime he had committed. Jin Chang-hyuk looked away, clearly ashamed, and admitted that he used to steal. Jin Chang-hyuk's face was tight with worry as he waited for her verdict. The instructor's voice was firm as she replied, stating that she certainly wouldn't praise someone for being a thief. His heart sank, bracing himself for the worst. But then, the instructor's tone shifted. She promised that while she wouldn't praise him, she also wouldn't let him face any unfair treatment because of his past. She explained that in her home, Elvenheim, people who break the law are given two choices. The first option is to serve their community. Her eyes narrowed with intensity as she revealed the second choice, to fight on the battlefield and protect their people. Hearing this, the crowd started murmuring. Even Soo-hyuk seemed surprised by this idea. It was a completely different way of thinking about crime and punishment. Then, Char looked directly at Jin Chang-hyuk and called him by his full name. She told him that by being here, by choosing to become a warrior, he had already chosen that second path. She explained that in Elvenheim, they have a word for it, Rangder. She laughed a little and explained that in his language, it would be something like honorable atonement. Jin Chang-hyuk just stared back, looking completely lost. He'd never heard of anything like it. Her expression turned serious again. She laid out her final condition. If he truly wanted to atone, he had to work harder than anyone else here to fulfill his duties. But she gave him one last, firm warning. He must never, ever forget the crime he committed. The instructor's voice was firm. She told him to always remember his crime and act with honor. She explained that while a crime can't be erased, it doesn't mean it can never be forgiven. As he listened, Jin Chang-hyuk's hand clenched into a tight fist, shaking with the weight of her words. This was more than just a second chance. It was a path to redemption he never thought he'd get. His voice was quiet, but his answer was clear. He understood, and he thanked her. It was a simple reply, but it carried all the emotion of the moment. With that, their conversation was over. Jin Chang-hyuk stood silently in the crowd, looking up at the elf who had just given him a reason to fight. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. Instructor Char turned her attention back to the rest of the group. With the matter settled, she announced it was time for the last question. A murmur of anticipation went through the crowd. She had barely finished speaking when a hand shot straight up into the air. Someone was incredibly eager to be the one to ask the final question. The instructor seemed a little surprised by how quickly the hand went up. She looked in that direction, her expression serious, and asked for the person's name. The person who raised their hand was Yang Soo-hyuk. He stood there confidently and stated his name for everyone to hear. But instead of moving on, a small smile appeared on the instructor's face. She told him that she already knew who he was. In fact, she admitted that she'd taken a personal interest in him. Her words immediately sent a ripple of whispers through the crowd. The other trainees were completely confused. They wondered if Soo-hyuk somehow knew the instructor already, but looking at them, they could tell that wasn't the case. It just didn't make any sense. Soo-hyuk was just as surprised as everyone else, wondering what she could possibly mean by personal interest. Char saw his confusion and, with that same knowing smile, she asked him if that was really the last question he wanted to ask her. The whole room was silent, waiting to see what he would do next. Soo-hyuk shook his head, clearing his thoughts. He wasn't going to get distracted by her comment about having a personal interest in him. He decided to ask something else entirely. Seeing his shift, the instructor simply told him to go ahead. With the attention of the entire room on him, Soo-hyuk asked his first real question. He wanted to know if she was planning on training all of them by herself. Instructor Char considered his question for a moment. She admitted it was a fair assumption. But no, that wasn't the case. She explained that while she was the head instructor, she didn't have the ability to teach every single subject by herself. She went on to say that she would be relying on the Earth instructors for help. But then she added something that got everyone's attention. For practical, hands-on training, she might personally oversee one specific team. Soo-hyuk immediately understood what she meant. He thought about it like a school. She was the principal. But for real combat, she'd act as the homeroom teacher for one special group. A small smile crossed his face. He found that very interesting. Instructor Char was about to end the question and answer session, telling everyone that any other questions would have to wait. But just as she was finishing her sentence, a loud voice from the crowd cut her off, shouting for her to wait. A man with a shaved head and a smug look on his face was the one who had spoken up. He looked right at the instructor and stated bluntly that he didn't trust her. Char just raised an eyebrow, a small, almost amused smile on her face, clearly unimpressed by his challenge. He kept talking, acting as if his point was perfectly reasonable. He argued that since she wasn't even human, it made no sense for any of them to trust her to be their teacher. The man wasn't finished. He pointed out that she wasn't even a proven, high-ranking hunter from their own country like the last instructor. Then he got personal, adding that with a face like hers, he seriously doubted she even knew how to fight. A nasty grin spread across his face as he delivered his final insult. He told everyone that, honestly, she looked like she was better suited for something else entirely, not the battlefield. The disrespect was just dripping from his words. Instructor Char's expression went cold. Her eyes, glowing with a faint blue light, narrowed dangerously. So, it was proof he wanted. With her back turned to the crowd, she announced that if proof was what he needed, she would show him. As she spoke, a powerful green energy began to swirl around her body. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, and the green energy flowed from her feet, spreading across the floor like a wave. The heckler and his friends just stood there, still smirking, completely unaware of the power they had just challenged. And then, in a flash, the energy exploded upwards. It wrapped around her in a massive, swirling pillar of green light, and the pressure in the room became immense. The energy slammed into the rude trainee before he could even react. He let out a choked scream as the force hit him head-on, completely overwhelming him. It wasn't just him, though. The wave of green energy washed over the entire room, and every single trainee cried out as they were slammed to the floor by an invisible force. Panic started to set in. The trainees struggled, but it was no use. Their bodies were completely frozen, pinned to the ground by the immense pressure. For the man who had started it all, it was even worse. He gasped for air, his face turning pale as he realized with pure terror that he couldn't even breathe. Looking down at the helpless crowd, Instructor Char's voice was perfectly calm. She told them that while proof was important, discipline was absolutely essential. Her eyes narrowed as she gave them a final warning. She said she'd let it go this time, since they were ignorant. But if anyone ever made the same mistake again, she wouldn't be nearly as forgiving. She made it crystal clear that if it happened again, there would be no mercy. The moment she finished speaking, the crushing weight vanished. The man who had challenged her gasped for air, finally able to breathe again after being on the verge of passing out. With her point made, she looked over the trainees, a small, confident smile on her face. But then, her expression shifted. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she noticed something strange in the crowd. In the middle of the room, one person was still standing completely untouched, Su-hyuk. He looked around at everyone else on the floor with a confused expression, as if wondering what had just happened. Instructor Char's eyes went wide with shock. She couldn't believe it. Even if she was just using it as a threat, he had actually endured her pressure. She wondered to herself how it was possible for a level 1, someone who had never even been on a battlefield, to resist her power. Instructor Char watched him, her mind racing. She realized she couldn't just keep an eye on him. With his level of composure, she thought he might as well be sent straight to a real battlefield. He was on a completely different level from everyone else here. But while she was seeing a hardened warrior, Su-hyuk was just feeling awkward. Standing alone like this was kind of embarrassing. He started to wonder if maybe he should have just pretended to collapse like everyone else. The instructor caught herself before getting too carried away. She reminded herself that having insides and a strong mind was separate from actual skill. Instead of making a quick judgment, she decided it was best to just observe him for now. All around Su-hyuk, the other trainees were finally starting to move again. They slowly pushed themselves up from the floor, groaning in pain and complaining about their backs. The pressure had clearly taken a toll on them. With a firm step forward, the instructor got everyone's attention. She announced that the introductions were over. Now, it was time to begin the actual training. She looked down at the trainees, a small, confident smile on her face. Then, she gave them one final instruction. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. She expected them to perform so well that she would never have a reason to stop smiling. Her words hit them hard. The trainees just stood there in stunned silence, completely overwhelmed. You could see the sweat starting to form on their faces as the pressure of her expectations really sank in. With that final warning hanging in the air, she simply turned her back on them. Without another glance, she announced that she would see them all in the next session and walked away, her long blonde hair flowing behind her. So, with the introductions over, the training moved to a whole new location. The next part was going to happen inside a massive, modern building. Turns out, the next phase wasn't more physical training. It was a classroom lecture. All the trainees were sitting at their desks, taking notes as the instructor began the lesson. He was teaching them about a specific cat-like monster, showing them diagrams at the front of the room. And off to the side, Instructor Char stood silently, watching over everyone. But for Su-hyuk, this was just painful. As a man who conquered a continent with his fists, sitting still in a lecture was a real struggle. He realized it had been ages since he'd had to sit through a theory class, and he was finding it incredibly hard to focus. He couldn't help but let out a big yawn. All he could think about was getting this over with, so he could finally start the practical training. This classroom stuff just wasn't for him, but Soo-hyuk's mind was already drifting. He was leaning on his hand, clearly struggling to stay focused. And from the back of the room, Instructor Shar noticed. Her eyes narrowed, locking right onto him. The very next moment, a jolt of green energy slammed into him. It was like getting shocked, snapping him wide awake with a pained expression on his face. Turns out, it was Instructor Shar. She stood there with her hand slightly raised, a faint glow still around it. Her look was cold and clear, a silent warning to pay attention. Soo-hyuk started sweating, a nervous laugh escaping him. He couldn't believe it. He'd dozed off for just a second and got punished immediately. He realized this was her way of telling him not to get distracted again. He got the message loud and clear, but as he touched his ear, he smirked to himself. The thing is, he'd never been good with books to begin with. This kind of stuff just wasn't his strong suit. As he sat there, Soo-hyuk noticed some movement beside him. The red-haired trainee in the next seat suddenly flinched, looking completely startled for a second. The guy quickly tried to play it cool, clearing his throat and pretending to focus on his notes. Inside, he was panicking, hoping he hadn't just been caught and trying to act like he didn't know anything. A small smirk spread across Soo-hyuk's face. He realized the guy must have been trying to steal a look at his notes. He thought to himself that the trainee seemed a lot more timid than his appearance suggested, but his amusement was cut short. The very next second, another jolt of green energy slammed into him, making his hair stand on end. He winced, completely caught off guard. At the front of the class, Instructor Shar was staring right at him. She called him out by name, demanding that he focus on her lesson. Soo-hyuk just lowered his head, a frustrated look on his face. He could already tell that her strict, rigid personality was not something he was going to get along with. With a loud thud, the instructor closed his book, signaling that the lesson for the day was finally over. He stood at the podium with a smile, telling everyone they did a good job, but he also gave them a warning. They needed to review the lesson, because a lot of students failed the written exam every single year. The trainees barely had the energy to respond. They looked completely drained, slumping in their chairs, as the mental weight of the intense class finally hit them. Turns out, the instructor was actually getting emotional. Wiping a tear from his eye, he admitted that he'd never seen a theory class so focused in his entire life, and wished every class could be like this one. While he was lost in the moment, he didn't notice who was standing by the door. Instructor Shar was there, watching him with her arms crossed, her expression completely unreadable. As the other trainees started to recover, Soo-hyuk began packing his things, ready to head out. But just as he was putting his book away, he was interrupted. A bright, cheerful voice called out to him. A young woman with a big smile gave him a little salute, her energy completely changing the mood in the room. Soo-hyuk looked at her and made a guess, asking if she was a middle schooler. That was the wrong thing to say. The girl's face turned red with anger as she yelled back that she was a high schooler, even calling him an old man. He immediately froze, awkwardly scratching the back of his head. He suddenly remembered she had told them she was 19, and he couldn't help but laugh nervously at his mistake. Seeing his reaction, the girl puffed out her chest with a smug grin, proud that she'd won the argument. With that settled, she got right down to business and asked him what he needed from her. The young woman leaned in, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She asked him about what happened earlier, when Instructor Shar used her power to discipline everyone. She pointed out that he was the only one who managed to endure it. Soo-hyuk was a little surprised. He thought no one else would have had the energy to even look around, but clearly she had noticed. Her excitement grew as she announced that she saw the whole thing, and it was amazing. Just then, a trainee with bright red hair walked up behind her. She turned to him immediately, asking if he saw it too, and telling him how incredible it was. She turned back to Soo-hyuk, her curiosity getting the better of her. She asked him if his heart was made of steel or something, wondering out loud how he possibly managed to endure that kind of pressure. Soo-hyuk just casually continued packing his bag. He told her he had the same ordinary heart as everyone else, and that he was probably just lucky. The girl wasn't buying it for a second, playfully telling him to stop pretending. The red-haired trainee watched the exchange with a smile. He seemed genuinely impressed, commenting that Soo-hyuk was even humble on top of everything else. He thought that was really cool. The red-haired trainee looked completely flustered. He admitted that he had been staring at Soo-hyuk during class, but quickly explained it wasn't for a weird reason. He apologized, saying he just really admired him. Soo-hyuk just gave a small, calm smile. He told the guy there was no need to apologize like that. In his head, though, he was reconsidering his opinion. Turns out this guy wasn't just all talk. He might actually be a decent person. The girl then jumped in with a bright smile, asking if he was leaving already. She suggested they all grab a bite to eat together, joking that they were the question trio from earlier. But Soo-hyuk didn't even look at her. He just flatly stated that he was busy and heading out. And just like that, he turned and walked away. He gave a small, dismissive wave over his shoulder, not even bothering to look back as he headed for the door. The girl stared after him, completely stunned by how fast he disappeared. She threw her hands up and yelled after him, jokingly asking if he was seriously using his abilities just to run away from them. The two trainees just stood there, watching him go. The red-haired guy seemed impressed, thinking Soo-hyuk's cool attitude was charismatic. The girl, however, was not having it. She just thought he was a mean old man for ditching them like that. Time passed, and soon enough, the trainees were stuck in a classroom. An instructor stood at the front, explaining that the theory portion of their training would last for a full 30 days. The instructor made it clear that this duration couldn't be shortened or extended for any reason. It was a strict national policy. Soo-hyuk just sat there, trying to pay attention, but you could tell he was already bored out of his mind. For someone who lived for combat, sitting in a classroom was like a prison. All he wanted was to take the test and move on to the practical training. The thing is, he couldn't afford to mess around. Surprisingly, a lot of people actually fail the written exam, so he knew he had to take it seriously. The only reason he could focus at all was because of that elf instructor, Shar. Her intense presence was unforgettable, and just the thought of her put him on edge. That pressure was so strong that it forced him to pay attention. In fact, the instructors were already predicting that this batch would have a high pass rate, probably because everyone was too scared to fail. Instructor Shar smiled, knowing that fear alone wouldn't guarantee success. She warned them that even if the written exam was easy, you couldn't pass without studying. That was the real trap. Time passed, and the trainees continued their classes. One afternoon, the girl who'd been complaining about Soo-hyuk before ran up to him, calling him old man again. She clearly had some gossip to share. She looked genuinely scared as she told him about a terrifying rumor. Apparently, there was a curse that made anyone who failed the written exam once fail it forever. Soo-hyuk, however, was completely calm. As he packed his bag, he just said he'd already heard about it. She shivered dramatically, asking how such a terrible curse could even exist, and trying to get him to admit he was scared too. But Soo-hyuk just thought she was overreacting. He told her the solution was simple: just don't fail. Then he added that he thought there was a real reason why some people kept failing, and it had nothing to do with a curse. She looked at him, confused, and asked what kind of reason he was talking about. Soo-hyuk's expression was serious as he looked past her. Just at that moment, the conversation of some other trainees nearby seemed to catch his attention, and it looked like he was about to use it to prove his point. And right on cue, the conversation from the other trainees proved his point. They were all laughing, talking about going to a cafe, having dinner, maybe even drinks. They figured they could just cram for the test at the last minute, so there was no need to study now. The girl's eyes went wide. At that moment, she finally understood what Soo-hyuk was talking about. The curse wasn't some magical spell. It was just people being lazy and not taking things seriously. With his point made, Soo-hyuk turned to leave. He told her that he'd be heading out, and that this was the exact reason he was passing on the snack gathering she'd mentioned. He wasn't going to waste his time like them. She just watched him go, a bit disappointed. She muttered under her breath that he was being really cold-hearted for just leaving like that. But as Soo-hyuk walked away, his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. He knew he'd made a bunch of excuses. The truth was, his real priority wasn't just studying. It was spending time with his family. Because beyond all the training and studying, he was thinking about the simple memory of his family sharing a meal together. That was the happiness he had returned for, and he made a silent, firm promise to himself that he would never, ever lose it again. Just like that, a month flew by. The day of the written exam had finally arrived. All the trainees were gathered in a large room, their backs to us as they stared ahead. The air was thick with nervous energy as everyone waited. The trainees started murmuring anxiously. One guy with red hair complained about how stressful it was that the results came out on the same day. The girl beside him was practically wringing her hands with worry, but Soo-hyuk just stood between them, hands in his pockets, looking completely unfazed. The girl with brown hair, Baek Ah-yeon, was completely on edge. You could practically hear her heart pounding in her chest as she waited for the announcement. The red-haired trainee next to her couldn't take it. He snapped at Ayan, asking her to please stop talking about it because she was just making his own anxiety worse. She just looked back at him, innocently asking if hearing it out loud really made him more nervous. He admitted that it did, his face tense with stress. But while everyone else was falling apart, Soo-hyuk was the complete opposite. He slowly let out a controlled breath, his eyes sharp and focused, totally unfazed by the pressure. The tension in the room was so thick, it felt like everyone's hearts were beating out of their chests. In the middle of it all, the red-haired trainee was practically vibrating with nervous energy, as if he was the center of everyone's attention. To burn off the stress, the red-haired trainee started playfully chasing Ayan around. Their lighthearted moment was cut short though. Soo-hyuk's voice cut through the noise, telling both of them to be quiet. The results were finally coming out. The playful chase came to a sudden end when the red-haired trainee, Oh Jin-ho, finally caught up to Baek Ayan. He tackled her in a clumsy, lighthearted way, and she let out a little gasp of surprise, caught completely off guard. At that exact moment, the results flashed up on the big screen. Everyone's attention snapped towards it as names scrolled by one after another. The entire room held its breath, searching for their own names on the list of those who passed. Suddenly, Baek Ayan threw her arms in the air and let out a huge cheer. She was absolutely beaming with relief and excitement. She shouted out that they had all passed. All three of them had made it through. A moment later, another trainee with dark hair walked up to her, looking impressed. He mentioned that she always seemed to be goofing off and asked how on earth she managed to get the top score. With a proud little pose, Ayan just replied that a genius always works the hardest where no one can see. He just laughed and admitted that she wasn't exactly wrong. As he looked away, slightly flustered, Ayan celebrated her little victory by making a funny face behind his back, sticking her tongue out playfully. While everyone else was celebrating loudly, Soo-hyuk just watched. His eyes were calm and steady, taking everything in without getting caught up in the excitement. Nearby, Oh Jin-ho was completely overwhelmed. Tears of relief streamed down his face as he clenched his fists, shouting that he had really passed. For him, this wasn't just about becoming a hunter. It meant he could finally make his younger siblings proud. He took a moment to wipe away his tears, a happy smile still on his face. Behind him, Soo-hyuk and Baek Ayan watched their friend with gentle expressions. They had all made it through together, and the sense of shared victory was clear. As the celebration continued, Baek Ayan's gaze landed on one of their teammates, Jin Chong-hyuk. She thought to herself that while he might seem a bit flashy on the surface, he was actually a really decent guy. Turns out, she got to know him because they sat next to each other during their training. He was surprisingly hardworking, and because of that, they naturally became friends. That's how she eventually learned his story. The truth was heavy. Jin Chang-hyuk was the only one taking care of his three younger siblings. He had to do it all on his own, with no parents to help. His family life had been a complete tragedy. His father passed away from drinking too much, and his mother, unable to take the abuse anymore, ran away from home. No one ever saw her again. So, since he was just a sophomore in high school, he had been taking care of his siblings all by himself. Ayan knew that people judged him for his rough, delinquent look, but that was just a result of the tough life he'd lived. At his core, he wasn't a bad person at all. She knew he was a good person, a responsible one. He'd even gone to prison once, caught stealing just so he could feed his younger siblings. But after he was released, he immediately started working to pay off all his debts. To Ayan, that single act proved he was a decent person through and through. At that moment, Soo-hyuk walked over to Jin Chong-hyuk. He told him he knew he'd been through a lot. He offered some encouragement, saying that since they were both better at physical work, he just needed to push a little harder to succeed. Jin Chong-hyuk was clearly touched. Wiping a tear from his eye, he looked up and thanked Soo-hyuk, saying that he owed it all to him. Soo-hyuk just smiled, a little bashful. He brushed off the compliment, insisting that he hadn't done anything special and that Jin Chang-hyuk had gotten here all on his own. Jin Chang-hyuk's expression was full of genuine respect. He told Soo-hyuk that seeing him work so hard was what gave him the motivation to push through. He looked him in the eye and gave one last, sincere thank you. Soo-hyuk just chuckled and waved his hand, brushing off the compliment. He playfully told his friend that flattery wasn't going to work on him. It was clear he wasn't someone who was used to that kind of praise. At that moment, Baek Ah-yeon's face lit up with a huge smile. She clasped her hands together excitedly and congratulated everyone, announcing that all three of them were officially moving on to practical training together. Jin Chang-hyuk then turned to Ah-yeon with a grateful smile, giving her a thumbs up. He thanked her for all her help, explaining how she'd worked hard to help him study every day after class. She just beamed back, telling him not to worry about it. That's what friends are for. Soo-hyuk, who had been listening quietly, looked genuinely surprised. It suddenly clicked for him that she was the one who had been helping Jin Chang-hyuk with his studies. He realized that she wasn't just fooling around all the time. There was a serious, dedicated side to her that he hadn't seen until now. Just then, the red-haired trainee, Oh Jin-ho, felt his phone buzzing in his pocket. He realized he was getting a call and quickly reached down to answer it. A huge grin spread across his face as he put the phone to his ear. He excitedly told his brother that he passed, just like he promised he would. With the hard part over, he confidently declared that they could leave everything to him now. Soo-hyuk and Ah-yeon watched from a distance as their friend celebrated. Soo-hyuk thought to himself that maybe he should bring him back down to earth a little, but he quickly decided against it, figuring that his friend would probably be fine on his own. With that thought, he pushed the small moment aside. His expression grew more serious as he turned his attention to the bigger picture. He looked over the other trainees who had passed, a quiet murmur spreading through the room. He realized that 42 out of 49 people had made it. He'd heard the average pass rate was supposed to be around 50%, so this was different. Something about it felt off. As he watched the instructor, Soo-hyuk started putting the pieces together. He realized the unusually high pass rate must be because of her. She might act tough, but it looked like she was actually an excellent teacher. Nearby, some of the other trainees were completely overwhelmed, hugging each other and crying with relief. One of them shouted that he never expected so many people to pass. Watching them, Instructor Shar just crossed her arms, a proud little smile on her face. But while everyone else was celebrating, Soo-hyuk just turned and started walking away from the crowd. He wasn't interested in the party. The instructor's eyes followed him, her expression unreadable as she watched him go. He paused, and a small, confident smile appeared on his face. He knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge, the practical training, was starting next week, and he was more than ready for it. From across the room, Instructor Shar watched him with a knowing look. She seemed to be thinking the same thing, her own smile suggesting she knew things were about to get very interesting. Just like that, a week flew by, and the time for practical training had finally arrived. The trainees stood waiting as their instructor walked into the room. Her steps were steady and confident as she greeted them. She stood before them with her hands on her hips and introduced herself as Shahar Kal Eluriat, the one in charge of Squad 8. She added that since they all knew her already, there was no need for a long introduction. The news that they were all in the same squad was a huge relief. Soo-hyuk, Baek, Ah-yeon, and Oh Jin-ho looked at each other, all clapping with big, excited smiles on their faces. Oh Jin-ho seemed especially happy. He brought his hands together, a look of genuine surprise on his face, as he wondered aloud how they all got so lucky to end up together. Shahar then explained how the squads were formed. She told them that she personally assigned each one, thinking it would be best to group people with similar personalities together. But she added that her being in charge of Squad 8 was pure fate. She explained that she picked this specific squad by drawing lots and felt like a blessing from the world tree had guided them all together. Hearing this, Baek Ah-yeon's eyes lit up with excitement. She clasped her hands together, completely thrilled by the idea that their meeting was destiny. Shahar's friendly expression disappeared in a flash. Her eyes began to glow with a menacing blue light, and she admitted that while it might be a grand fate, it didn't mean she would show them any mercy in their training. The sudden change in her attitude sent a wave of fear through the trainees. Oh Jin-ho and Baek Ah-yeon froze, their happy faces now filled with shock. The fun was over. Yang Soo-hyuk watched the instructor's sudden shift in attitude. He could tell she was done being friendly. The atmosphere changed instantly, and he knew that the time for games was over. This was the start of real combat training. Shahar stood before the three of them, her tone now all business. She announced that today they would be entering a portal. To kick things off, she put Jin Chang-hyuk on the spot, asking him to explain exactly what a portal was. Jin Chang-hyuk answered confidently that a portal is an entrance to another world. Shahar nodded, confirming he was correct, but she immediately added that it wasn't that simple. Not all portals were the same. Her eyes eyes then moved to Yang Soo-hyuk, testing his memory from their previous lecture. Without missing a beat, he explained that portals are divided into two main types, friendly portals and hostile portals. Shahar continued the lesson, focusing on the dangerous ones. She explained that hostile portals are ranked on a scale from 1 to 13. The higher the rank, the more powerful and dangerous the portal becomes, a fact made very clear by the difference between a small, stable rank 1 portal and a massive, swirling rank 13 vortex. Shahar seemed pleased with their answers. She stood with her hands on her hips and noted that it was good to see everyone was paying attention, even those who were usually less focused. With the quiz portion over, she got right to the point. She announced that today, their training would involve entering a rank 1 hostile portal. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. The news immediately got a reaction out of Beck Ayan. She let out a little gasp of excitement, her eyes wide and her hands clasped together. She was clearly thrilled by the idea of a real mission. Seeing her enthusiasm, Shahar put her on the spot, asking her to define a rank 1 portal. Without missing a beat, Ayan proudly explained that it's the lowest ranked portal, filled with weaker monsters, which is why it's used as a training dungeon for candidates like them. Shahar listened to the perfect answer. Then, she asked a simple follow-up question that hung in the air. If that's the case, then it must be a very easy dungeon, right? The tone of her question felt like a trap. Falling right into the trap, Beck Ayan beamed with confidence. With a happy cheer, she declared that yes, it was a very, very easy portal. She was completely sure of herself, treating it like a game. Shahar's friendly expression vanished in an instant. Her eyes glowed with a dangerous purple light as she asked another question. If the dungeon is so easy, does that mean the monsters inside can't kill people? The sudden change in tone made both Ayan and Jin-ho freeze, their smiles wiped clean off their faces. While they were silent, Soo-hyuk spoke up, his voice calm and steady. He looked straight ahead and stated the cold, hard truth. The monsters can absolutely kill people. Shahar agreed with him, confirming that those creatures could definitely kill them. To prove her point, she explained that monsters emit a certain kind of pressure, and at that moment, a dark, suffocating energy started pouring out of her, washing over the trainees. She gave it a name, the overwhelming feeling, the raw pressure to kill. It was pure, murderous intent. The dark energy exploded outwards, washing over the trainees like a physical force. It felt like death itself. Ayan and Jin-ho instantly buckled under the pressure, their faces twisted in pain as if they were being crushed. Even Soo-hyuk looked serious, caught in the middle of the suffocating aura. But Shahar noticed something strange. Her eyes widened slightly as she saw Soo-hyuk standing perfectly still, completely unfazed by an aura that was crippling everyone else. Soo-hyuk, on the other hand, realized he was sticking out. He wondered for a moment if he should at least pretend to struggle, just to blend in. While he was thinking, the other trainees were having a much harder time. They were all doubled over, grunting and sweating, fighting just to stay on their feet against the crushing weight of Shahar's killing intent. But before Soo-hyuk could decide, Shahar's voice cut through the tension. She told him he didn't need to fake it. Soo-hyuk looked a little surprised, realizing she had read his mind completely. With the lesson over, the pressure finally lifted. Shahar explained to the cadets that while the feeling was strange, they had to get used to it. She looked at them seriously and repeated her earlier warning. Monsters can and will kill people. This was the reality they needed to accept. Shahar's gaze was sharp and serious as she gave them her final warning. She explained that if they couldn't get used to the killing intent monsters gave off, they would die, and it would happen much sooner and easier than they could ever imagine. Her words hit them hard. The trainees swallowed nervously, the weight of the danger they were about to face finally sinking in. Even Soo-hyuk looked serious, standing silently beside his friends. Shahar watched their reactions carefully. After a moment, she seemed satisfied, noting that almost everyone had braced themselves for the reality of the situation. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she focused on the one person who hadn't. She admitted that she hadn't expected them to endure her killing intent so well, which made her suspicious. She then asked the entire group if any of them had ever been on a real battlefield before. Her eyes were locked on Soo-hyuk as he quietly replied that he'd experienced something similar. A small, knowing smirk appeared on her face. She told him that just having a similar experience wouldn't be nearly enough to withstand true killing intent. With her eyes fixed on him, she stated plainly that he must be hiding something big. Shahar didn't seem to mind that Soo-hyuk had secrets. She just told him that he'd better have the skill and stamina to back back them up. With that settled, she called for everyone's attention, ready to give them their next task. Everyone gathered outside, standing on the pavement. The trainees, including Soo-hyuk and his friends, looked towards Shahar, waiting to hear what was next. Shahar laid out the plan. She told them their destination was the portal at Mappo Station, and if they ran at full speed, they could make it in an hour. The red-haired trainee's jaw dropped, and he asked in disbelief if she seriously expected them to run the whole way there. She looked at them matter-of-factly and explained her simple reasons. She didn't know how to use public transportation and couldn't drive a car. Besides, she added, a good warm-up run before a real fight was always a good idea. Then, her attention turned directly to Soo-hyuk. She suddenly appointed him as the leader of Squad 8 and told him he was responsible for guiding his teammates. She gave them their final order, meet her at Mappo Station in exactly 1 hour. Soo-hyuk looked a little surprised by the sudden promotion. With her final order given, Shahar told them she was going on ahead, and then, in a literal gust of wind, she was gone. The three of them just stood there, completely dumbfounded by the sheer speed she moved with. They were left staring at the empty space where their instructor had been just a second ago. Breaking the silence, Soo-hyuk sighed and stated the obvious. They had no choice but to run. The red-haired trainee, Oh Jin-ho, immediately started whining about how much he didn't want to go. Beside them, Baek Ah-yeon just let out a tired of agreement. Without another word, Soo-hyuk and Jin-ho took off, sprinting down the street at full speed. They left Ah-yeon in the dust instantly. She looked completely annoyed, shouting after them to wait for her. After a grueling run, the team finally made it to the entrance of Mappo Station. Both Jin-ho and Ah-yeon were gasping for air, completely exhausted from the sprint across the city. Baek Ah-yeon was bent over, hands on her knees, trying not to collapse. Oh Jin-ho looked like he was about to pass out, muttering that he was dying. He couldn't believe they'd actually made it. But the most surprising thing was Soo-hyuk. He wasn't even sweating, looking as calm and composed as if he'd just gone for a light stroll. Waiting for them at the entrance was their instructor, Shahar. With her arms crossed, she gave them a nod of approval. She told them they'd arrived faster than she expected, which was an excellent result. As a reward, she gave them exactly 10 minutes to rest before they would enter the dungeon. Hearing the word rest was like music to their ears. Jin-ho and Ah-yeon looked up, their faces filled with pure, unfiltered relief. They happily confirmed the order, just glad to have a moment to catch their breath. Without wasting a second, both Jin-ho and Ah-yeon collapsed onto the pavement. Ah-yeon sighed that she honestly thought she was going to die from exhaustion, and Jin-ho immediately agreed. While his two teammates were completely wiped out, Soo-hyuk just stood there, watching them silently, still not showing a single sign of fatigue. As Soo-hyuk watched his teammates recover, he started putting the pieces together. He realized that before the run, everyone was extremely tense from Shahar's killing intent. But after sprinting all the way here, their muscles seemed to have completely loosened up. He looked over at their instructor, a question forming in his mind. He wondered if she had planned that on purpose. He came to a firm conclusion. If that was the case, then she was a much better instructor than she let on. The title of chief instructor was clearly not just for show. Just then, Shahar tapped her foot on the ground. She announced that exactly 10 minutes had passed. Her two exhausted teammates were now back on their feet, looking re-energized. Shahar looked at the three of them and asked if they were ready to enter. Without a moment's hesitation, they all shouted back that they were. Shahar placed her hand on the entrance to the gate. With a soft hum, the massive door began to slide open, revealing the darkness inside. She turned back to the cadets, her expression serious. Seeing that they were prepared, she told them it was time to go in immediately. Without hesitation, the three of them followed her inside. Soo-hyuk looked calm and focused, ready for whatever was waiting for them. As they entered the dim space, Shahar's voice echoed around them. She explained that the rank 1 dungeon at Mappo Station was called Muge. They found themselves in what looked like an abandoned subway station, with cracks running through the floor and walls. Shahar then added that the name's literal meaning was a world without boundaries. Shahar led the way down the cracked, crumbling stairs. The air was heavy and cold as they moved deeper into the abandoned station. Soo-hyuk and the others followed close behind, their footsteps echoing quietly in the dark. As they walked, Shahar's voice broke the silence. She told them that through her studies, she had learned something interesting. Soo-hyuk's expression was sharp, his full attention on her words. She explained that there are actually many dimensions in this world that are called Mugya. For Soo-hyuk, who had literally come from another world, this information hit differently. Her words painted a picture of a terrifying place. She described a Muge as a forsaken world with no name, a dimension abandoned by all. Before them, an image of a swirling, chaotic portal seemed to prove her point. But then she added one more detail. She'd heard that even in these forsaken worlds, you can sometimes discover the leftovers of civilizations that were once intelligent and thriving. This meant that even in a place abandoned by everyone, there might still be something left to find. She continued her thought, explaining that all this information led her to wonder about something. As she spoke, she held up her official portal entry permit. The ID card had her picture and name on it, Shahar Kal Aluriat. Then she laid out her incredible theory. She asked if it was possible that a Mugye was actually a world created from the destruction of another one. As she spoke, two guards standing watch at the glowing red portal snapped to attention, giving a sharp salute. The guards held their salute perfectly still as Shahar walked right between them, her long blonde hair flowing behind her. She didn't hesitate for a second, moving straight for the portal. The whole team stood before the massive gate. It was a swirling vortex of red and black energy, crackling with power. As Suhayuk stared into it, he thought to himself that Shahar's theory might be exactly right. He knew better than anyone that worlds could be destroyed and others could be reached. The red energy from the portal washed over him, but he didn't look worried at all. A small, confident smile spread across his face. To him, this wasn't scary. It was just going to be interesting. The moment they stepped through the gate, they were in a completely different world. The sky was a deep, angry red, stretching over endless, jagged mountains. It was a dead, empty place, with a thick fog clinging to the ground. Behind them, the portal they had just used swirled like a black hole, crackling with red lightning. It was their only way in, and their only way out. Suhayuk led the team out, emerging from the crackling energy. He took a deep breath and immediately felt the sharp bite of the air. This was Mugye, and despite the fiery look of the place, it was freezing cold, about -2 degrees. Once everyone was through, Shahar turned to face them. She announced that from this point on, she was stepping back. She warned them to move carefully, because they had no idea when an enemy might show up. The trainees all nodded, understanding the mission was now in their hands. She gave them one last piece of intel. The monsters that lived in this world were called Naro. With that final warning, they were ready to take their first steps into the unknown. As they moved forward, Suhayuk went over the details of the Naro in his mind. They were big, about 3 meters tall, and looked like wolves. Their main attack was biting, but they were also known for their incredible jumping ability. The most dangerous part, though, was that they always moved in packs of 3 to 5. He knew this was only a rank 1 dungeon, but for New Awakened, a pack of monsters like that would be a serious challenge. But from his perspective, as someone who had conquered an entire continent, a small smirk appeared on his face. These creatures didn't seem like much of a threat at all. He could almost feel the unasked question hanging in the air. Why was he so sure of himself? The reason was simple. With his hands on his hips, he mentally gave the command. In an instant, bright blue system windows materialized in the air right in front of him. He knew his recent training had helped. His stats had definitely improved overall, but that wasn't the real reason he was so sure of himself. The most important factor was his skill, the inner meridian mastery. The awakening effect from it was just incredibly powerful. It was a special passive skill. The system explained that it doubled both his energy recovery and how efficiently he used it. On top of that, it gave him an indestructible body effect, applying an extra 20% enhancement to all of his physical abilities. It was a massive advantage. He thought about this new power system. At first, it felt awkward and strange compared to what he was used to, but he had to admit, the bonus effects and stat boosts were surprisingly good. Because of those boosts, his actual combat power was already way higher than other awakened at his level. And when he added his lifetime of martial arts knowledge and combat experience to that, he figured his real strength put him at the very peak of second-rate warriors, maybe even touching first-rate. He clenched his hand into a tight fist, feeling the power inside. It had only been 1 month since he woke up, and he'd already recovered this much of his old strength. With this kind of power, there was absolutely no reason to be worried about a simple rank 1 dungeon. The moment they stepped into the dungeon, Suhayuk's senses went on high alert. Something was wrong. His eyes narrowed, instantly picking up on a presence nearby. Without hesitation, he threw up a hand, signaling for everyone to stop. The others immediately froze behind him, their eyes following his gaze into the red, dusty landscape. In the distance, a pack of 4-legged, dog-like monsters was charging straight for them. Suhayuk watched them approach and calmly noted that it looked like they had some welcoming guests. The other 2 trainers trainees stiffened, clearly nervous to be facing 5 of them right from the start. But then Shahar's voice cut through the tension. She told them that with their abilities, they should be able to take down the entire pack without a single scratch. She looked down at them, her expression calm and collected. She told them not to be tense, but to focus. Then, her voice rang out with the clear command for Squad 8 to prepare for combat. The first fight was about to begin. Shahar's eyes were fixed on the approaching monsters. She gave a clear order to the squad, telling them not to rush in. They were to wait, holding their ground until the creatures were well within their visual range. Soo-hyuk watched the creatures get closer, a look of boredom on his face. For someone who'd conquered an entire continent, this was child's play. He knew he could end it all in an instant, but he decided it was best to follow the instructor's orders for now. While he waited, his attention shifted to his 2 teammates. He noticed that neither of them was carrying a weapon, even though they were available for training. He preferred fighting barehanded himself, but he couldn't help but wonder if the other 2 had special abilities that made weapons unnecessary. Just then, the pack of monsters closed the remaining distance. They charged forward in a blur of fur and claws, their jaws wide open and their glowing eyes locked on the trainees. The ground shook slightly under their powerful strides. The moment the creatures crossed the line, Shahar's calm expression sharpened. With perfect timing, she gave the final one-word command for them to attack. The moment the order was given, the red-haired trainee, Oh Jin-ho, didn't hesitate. With a loud battle cry, he lunged forward, his hands armed with sharp metal claws, ready to tear into the monsters. Soo-hyuk watched Jin-ho's loud charge with a bored expression, wondering what all the screaming was about. His attention then shifted to the girl, Baek Ah-yeon, who was now surrounded by a shimmering aura. He realized she was a support type, and he gave a slight nod of approval. She wasn't bad. With both of his teammates now in action, Soo-hyuk decided it was time for him to move too. A powerful blue energy began to swirl around his feet, signaling that he was about to get serious. He activated one of his martial arts techniques, Gale Step. In an instant, he shot forward like a bullet, leaving a trail of blue light in his wake as he closed the distance to the monsters. He moved so fast that he blew right past Jin-ho, who was still in mid-charge. The red-haired trainee's eyes went wide in disbelief. He couldn't believe how incredibly fast Soo-hyuk was. As he moved, Soo-hyuk decided this was the perfect chance. It was time to see what his body was truly capable of now. One of the creatures lunged right for him, its massive mouth opened wide, ready to bite down with incredible force. But Soo-hyuk was already gone. He sidestepped the attack so smoothly that the beast just slammed its jaws into the dirt, missing him completely. Now in the perfect position, he prepared one of his signature moves from his past life, the Iron Shattering Palm, a technique designed to create a powerful shockwave. He slammed his open palm into the creature's side. The impact didn't just stop there though. A wave of pure force shot straight through the first monster and slammed into another one standing right behind it. It was a piercing attack that could take down multiple enemies with a single blow. The first 2 monsters were down, but another one immediately stepped up. It was huge, and it slammed its massive paw on the ground, getting ready to pounce. You could see the pure rage in its glowing yellow eyes. Its mouth was wide open, showing off rows of teeth that looked like they could tear through steel. But Soo-hyuk didn't seem scared at all. Instead of backing away, he planted his own foot firmly on the ground, digging in to unleash his next attack. In a flash, he launched himself into the air, twisting his body into a powerful whirlwind kick. A bright blue energy surrounded his leg as he brought his heel around, aiming to bury the beast with a move he called Wind Burial. The impact was insane. His foot connected perfectly, driving the monster's head straight down into the ground with so much force that the earth cracked beneath it. He landed with incredible force, his foot planted firmly on the ground. The energy from the attack was so intense, it was still swirling around him like smoke. The monster was completely crushed beneath him, its head driven into the dirt. Soo-hyuk stood there calmly, not even breathing hard. Just like that, the third one was down. Watching from the side, the other 2 trainees were completely stunned. The red-haired guy just stared, his jaw open, muttering that what he just saw was totally insane. Even their instructor, Shahar, was taken aback. She watched him with a serious expression, wondering how a mere trainee could move like that. For a second, she even questioned if he was human at all. Hey, real quick, my mom said this channel would get 0 subscribers. If you enjoyed the story so far, click subscribe to watch the next part.